that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I wonder hope gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Finnell. Maybe I should switch those around, Tom Finnell and George Harvey, from time to time. Tom is...
I could pretend to be you and you could pretend to be me.
Let's try it and see if anybody notices. Okay. Every day I get up. Today I was up at 3 o'clock. But every day I get up early and I look at the news and I record what I see at my website, geoharvey.wordpress.com. And Tom and I go over the most exciting news items of the previous week.
The best of the blog.
The best of the blog every Thursday morning. So we start with the previous Thursday mornings and give you about 20, 22, 23 news items that have shown up during the week. So we'll just start.
Let's look at the previous Thursday morning.
Yeah, let's do that. This is Thursday, April 16th. And this is from the Scotsman. A wind turbine in Orkney became the first in the UK to generate more than 100 million kilowatt hours of electricity. That's a lot of money.
I figured if it's a dime a kilowatt hour, which is an average, that's 10 million bucks.
It's 10 million bucks, but I'll bet you it's more than a dime.
I'm sure it is.
It sits on the island's exposed Burger Hill, the windiest location for a wind farm in Europe. It was erected as a prototype in 2002 and produces enough power on average to supply 1,400 homes. That's one
There's a picture
wind
of Burger
turbine.
Hill there.
Yep.
And it's interesting, if you don't know where the Orkneys are, they're off the northeast coast of Scotland.
Yep.
So there's two groups of islands out there. The first ones are the Orkneys.
And
The second ones are the Shetlands.
Shetlands, yeah.
They
Where
belong to Scotland.
They have Shetland ponies.
Well, I think they did one time.
They do.
They
And
probably still
they
do.
also, believe it or not, have Shetland cows, which is
Shetland cows.
Yep, they're very small cows. These are animals that can graze on the very sparse grasses that the islands
makes sense.
provide. It's kind of like living in Labrador or something. Anyway, that I thought was extraordinarily exciting.
I had a couple more things.
You do?
About this one.
About that one, okay.
Well, it just says that this particular wind turbine, which you see in the picture, I'll bring the picture back up,
Mm-hmm.
was one of the largest wind turbines in the world when they erected it.
Okay.
Okay, so
And
this
now
is
it's
one
not
of the
anymore.
first biggies. And a tip height of 70 meters.
It's tall.
That's pretty big. Most
22 stories
You're
or
going to get
so.
approximately there.
Yeah.
So it's about 200, 250 feet, something
Yeah.
like that. Wow, that's up there.
Yep.
And the machine is able to take advantage of an average wind speed of 25 miles an hour.
That's the average at the site.
Yeah, so they get a lot of wind.
Yeah, they get a lot of wind.
Because I'm walking around here in Brattleboro at 25 miles an hour, and I'm getting cold.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Back to you.
Okay. This one is from the Environmental Defense Fund. Americans' power generation fleet has changed so much since the 1950s, and especially over the last decade, that the amount of carbon we emit per megawatt hour of electricity produced has dropped to its lowest point in recorded history. In fact, 2015 could be the cleanest ever for the power industry.
Now, they blame this, if that's the right word, on two major developments. One is renewable energy projects are skyrocketing.
Yes,
Anybody
indeed.
that listens to this show knows that, because we talk about it
Yep,
a lot.
all three of them.
And the second one, which probably isn't as good a thing as it might be, but the switch from coal to cleaner natural gas plants continues.
Yes, well,
And we'll see how that...
we'll see how that develops. Natural gas right now is at, I think, a record low price.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
really, really at rock bottom. But, you know, we've been saying it could only go up from where it is at low price, rock bottom, for about a year now.
Yeah, it keeps going down.
Not by much.
The takeaway from this thing is, this is their message to us. In due time, such progress may become, well, business as usual, but only if supportive policies continue to be adopted and Americans remain willing to fight for them.
Yes, well,
And there's pressure against it.
there's very expensive
Pretty
and well-paid pressure
Well
against it.
paid, yeah.
Because
And
there are
you say
certain,
Koch brothers.
there are certain people who are willing to put a whole lot of money into making sure that they are allowed to continue getting the environment dirty, dumping their refuse in other people's backyards.
Well, we'll be talking about exactly that.
Yes,
as
we-
this goes further on.
We always do. Okay, environmental leader brought us. Oh, have you got more on that one, or?
No, I just brought up this new one.
This is environmental leader. Okay, Dow Chemical Company announced new sustainability goals to be accomplished by 2025. This is 10 years from now, which include creating products that offset 3 times more carbon dioxide than they emit during their lifetime cycle, and delivering $1 billion in cost savings or new cash flow by valuing nature above business decisions, or in business decisions. And that, I think, is really interesting.
If they really mean it, it's very interesting.
I think they probably
I read this
really mean it.
article and I said, this is a puff piece.
No, I don't think it is. You know, I've been looking at this for a long time and saying to myself, you know, there is a way that you can make plastics where the carbon that you're getting doesn't come out of a hole in the ground, it comes out of the air.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, we will.
One of the processes is doing exactly that.
Yep. And these people, if they can do that, what it means, among other things, is that they don't have to buy oil. Because it's amazing. People don't think about the amount of oil that's used
Into petrochemistry.
in all kinds of chemistry. When the gas crisis came in 1973, I was working in the chemical industry. And one of the things that we bought used at the factory where I worked was acetic acid. And you open a container of acetic acid and you smell what smells like vinegar.
It is vinegar.
Just about. And when the gas crisis came, the price of acetic acid and the availability changed markedly. It got very difficult to get acetic acid, and the price went through the roof.
Wow.
And I said to, you know, my bosses, why would that happen? I mean, acetic acid can be made out of ciders, apple cider, it can be made out of beer, wine, whatever you want. Does it really require that much energy to make cider, for example? And they said, no, you don't understand. They don't make acetic acid out of vinegar. They don't make it out of cider apples or you know, malt. They make acetic acid out of oil. And all of this stuff that we were using, you know, lactic acid and so forth, became very difficult to get because it originated as oil. And the polyethylene, the polypropylene, the styrofoam, all of that stuff was coming from oil.
Yep.
And
Basically,
now
that's what organic chemistry is all about.
that is, except you can also make it out of cellulose and lignin and the other things that are found in plants. Okay, this is from Clean Technica, and you know, this is something. There's a comment that I want to make on this that isn't really part of the article, but it relates to Ivanpah. As it turns out, the solution to the serious problem discovered last year at Ivanpah, the first solar power tower in the U.S., actually turned out to be one weird trick. And the problem, of course, being that it was killing birds.
Yep.
A mishap in January produced the eureka moment for safe solar power tower development. Now there are no more dead birds at all.
Well, yeah. I'll point to these pictures here. The upper right is this Ivanpah tower that we're talking about.
Yep.
And you can see it is presently being illuminated.
Yes.
All those mirrors there, they got a fancy name for them, but they're mirrors.
Heliostats.
They call them heliostats, but they're mirrors. They focus on that point there, and it boils something.
It heats up salt very hot.
Yeah, and they use that to generate power. The one in the middle there is a new one that's on the same concept, and this is where the mishap occurred, because they were testing them by putting the mirrors in standby position, which is shooting up at some point in the sky.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, birds were flying into that hot position up there in the sky, which is illustrated in the bottom there.
And
they were frying.
It looks like a halo.
Nobody anticipated this.
Yes.
So they have solved it by not pointing them all in the same place.
Yeah.
Which, duh.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that I wanted to mention about Ivanpah is that the first month that the plant was in production, it produced something like 35% of what was anticipated as its monthly production goal.
So it wasn't meeting its expectations.
Well,
What
that's
was
the way
problem?
that's the way it came out in the press. The problem, it hadn't gone through its shakedown yet.
Oh, okay.
They were still shaking
Still
it down.
playing games with it, yeah.
They were playing games with it. So that was the problem with Ivanpah. And you are going to hear, I'm sure, because it's the way the press works and the way people work, both of those facts come up
Yeah.
over and over and over again.
Bad news travels faster than good news.
And it also sticks around forever.
Yeah.
Even if it's not relevant anymore. Okay, that came from Clean Technica. Our next item from the Australian Financial Review is this. One of Australia's largest power generators, AGL Energy, has adopted a new policy. AGL will not finance and will not build new coal-fired power stations, and it will not extend the operating life of any coal-fired power stations beyond 2050. The announcement came at the opening of AGL's 102 megawatt Ningyan, I don't know, Nyngan solar plant.
Well, it's interesting that this is coming out of Australia,
Yeah.
because they've been very tightly wed to coal power because they got a lot of coal.
The central government of Australia is, and
Yeah.
some of the states'
The states
governments
are not. Yeah.
but some of them are not, and what we're seeing here is one of the utilities. Not
Yep, this is one of the larger. Well, this is one of Australia's largest power generators.
right, and one of the things that's interesting is that the central government got very testy about this.
They did.
Yeah, there was a subsequent article on this in which they said, "We're not going to pay for that. We're not." So, oh well, you're going to have to do that on your own. If you're going to shut down your coal-burning plants, you're going to have to pay for it yourselves. And we do have another article about shutting down coal-burning plants in Australia.
Well, we got another one here about chemical companies or about oil companies.
This is about BP.
Yep.
BP shareholders voted overwhelmingly to publish regular updates on how its strategies were affecting climate change, which of course isn't happening.
Of course not.
Well, that's what
We still have winter.
right. That's what some oil companies would have you believe anyway. We don't believe it. We're just being facetious. But BP shareholders voted to publish updates on how its strategies were affecting climate change, making it one of the first oil companies to disclose such details. The plan was proposed by a group of investors. The annual meeting and got support of 98% of the votes.
That's very interesting.
Isn't
Who
it?
are these shareholders?
Well, by golly, go into the article. I think you'll find the name Ceres mentioned.
Well, there's a few of them. The California Public Employees Retirement System,
which is a member of Ceres.
which is big.
It's huge.
Yeah, Ceres, CERES.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another one as big is Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund.
Yes, which I don't know that is a member of Ceres, but it could be. And because the two of them have got very similar approaches. But
Okay.
Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund is close to $1 trillion. And the membership of Ceres is a couple of $1 trillion.
So
And-
you're talking about some significant investors. here.
Right, and what has happened here is that Ceres has been going to big companies, and by big companies, what we're talking about is General Motors, here BP. Clearly, this was a Ceres-backed issue, and saying, You know, if your stockholders are going to protect their investments, they're going to have to know how climate change will impact the value of stock.
So ultimately, this is at least as much about economics.
This is really about economics. Yeah. This is about economics. And the history of Ceres was that they started working on this kind of issue at the time of the oil spill in Alaska.
Okay.
The
Valdez?
Valdez,
yeah.
Yes. And they started going to investors. They were big investors, but they started going to other investors and companies and saying, "You've got to learn how to. We've got to stop this kind of thing." And they got absolutely no traction for years. Not absolutely no, but very little. And finally, somebody said, "We should be pointing out to the insurance companies and the insurance business and the mortgage businesses and the bank businesses that they've got to cover their losses." And, and that means that they've got to account for the possibility of a loss before it happens.
Yeah.
So they went to them and said, when they went into a bank or an insurance company and they said, "By the way, climate change is real and you'd better be prepared for it because it is going to impact your bottom line." The message that they were giving was one that the companies could not just turn away from. They actually had to investigate.
I would expect.
And when they investigated, they wound up saying to Ceres, "I think we could join you on this."
Yeah.
And so Ceres got to a point where now they've got $2 trillion worth of investments behind them, which is enough money that people usually pay attention.
I would think.
Not enough money that Koch Industries pays attention, or ExxonMobil, or for that matter, the various people they have, what's the word?
Shills?
Corrupted?
Yeah.
Is that the word? Enslaved?
The shills they have corrupted.
Shills they have in Washington, D.C.,
Yeah.
who we will not name right now, but you'll probably hear their names sooner or later in other contexts. Anyway, they've been getting a lot of traction on this, and they went to BP, and my bet is they went in there and said, in front of all those shareholders, we've got to know that our investments are protected, and that means we've got to know what impact what climate change will have on them.
Well, along this line, we've been talking a lot about stuff, this exact stuff, and where's it coming from? It's coming from Bloomberg. Bloomberg.
Yeah.
Who's Bloomberg? I mean, these guys are money people.
They're money people.
This is Wall
Absolutely,
Street.
yes. And it's from Morgan Stanley, and it's from UBS, and it's from, and you can go down a list of investment houses and financial managers and financial advisors and so forth who are giving advice.
Yeah.
And, anyway, that particular one came from News 24. It could have come from just about anywhere, really. But
moving right along.
Moving along, Clean Technica gave us this interesting piece, and in a poll of U.S. parents, 81% said they want to live in a solar-powered home.
Yep.
Wow. The majority, 81%. The majority, 67%, also want solar to be the world's primary energy source when their children grow up, and 95% believe it is their responsibility to teach their children about alternative energy for a better environment for the future.
Well,
That's
all of
a
this
lot.
makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
All of it, the kids are the ones that are going to inherit the world we leave them.
That's true. That is true. Okay. Saturday, April 18th, Clean Technica gave us this. The European Commission announced approval for Germany to invest nearly 30 billion euros in the development of 20 offshore wind farms. Germany notified the EU of its plans to invest in 17 wind farms set to be located in the North Sea and another 3 in the Baltic Sea, amounting to a total of 7 gigawatts of new capacity.
So what seems to be new here is Germany has been focusing on land developments, and now they're moving back out into the sea.
Well, they've been doing a lot of sea development.
But now they're moving.
Yeah.
Moving it.
And that picture is an interesting picture.
Yeah, it is.
That's a ship. Doesn't look much like a ship, does it?
It's actually probably a barge.
You might call it a ship out of water.
But it's a ship, yeah. and those big things sticking up out of it, those columns, are what it rests on the ocean floor.
Yeah, they're jacks.
They jack up this barge so that it's a stable platform for them to lift windmills into place.
Yep.
I
And
mean,
you can take this thing from one turbine site to the next very quickly, and then set up these turbines. And you know, one thing that I've mentioned from time to time is the wind farm off the coast of Wales. They were able to put the turbines in at a rate of one a day.
Yeah. Well, if they're made in the factory, they're just sitting on the shelf.
Absolutely.
And bring them out there, set them up.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, there was a lot of preparation for each of those. And there's a lot of work to be done after the turbine is put in place, hooking it up, because they use submarine cables to do that. So it's not an easy job. And the wind turbines, you know, it might take 3 months to put in 90 wind turbines, and then another 6 months to put in the cables and the various connections that keep them going. But
one other thing you don't even think about is how many extra jobs are created making things like this.
oh yeah, man, it's unbelievable. There's lots and lots and lots of them. Okay, the Nebraska the Public Power District, the state's largest utility, announced plans to replace a coal-fired power plant unit with one that runs on hydrogen, cutting its carbon emissions by over 1 million tons per year.
This is an interesting story.
Isn't that something? Even as the state battles proposed federal rules on coal plants, it will generate 125 megawatts with the unit. This came from Reuters Africa, and Reuters Africa has a lot of stuff about renewable energy. But they're moving from coal to hydrogen.
Yeah. The plant's there. The plant was designed to run on coal, and they're running it with hydrogen now. Where are they getting the hydrogen? Okay, and it explains here.
Very good.
They've got a subcontractor called Monolith Materials.
Yes.
And they're supplying the hydrogen, which it will produce from a facility it plans to build on site.
Okay.
That will manufacture a material called carbon black, which they can sell.
Yes.
It's used in tires and probably why your suspenders are black and stuff. and it's used in laptop keys and car tires.
Yeah, right.
It's using natural gas as a feedstock to power its facility instead of oil or coal tar, which they normally would use to make this carbon black. And
so they're taking natural gas and they're making it into carbon black. But what they're doing
is separating the carbon from the hydrogen, and then that's in the natural gas.
Yeah.
They're burning the hydrogen, which leaves you this terrible residue called water. And they're taking the carbon that's left over, and it's already in a form of carbon black, which is just carbon in very small particles, which has a big market and has had a big market for a long time.
Right.
That's what the reason why they're in tires is it makes the rubber stronger.
Right. Right. Carbon is in, well,
it's in a lot of things.
It's in a lot of things. It's in all organic compounds, which means
by definition.
Yeah, our bodies are very largely made of carbon. And, you know, our food is very largely made of carbon.
It's useful stuff, yeah.
Carbon is really one of nature's most amazing things, but I don't think it's quite as amazing as water. Water is truly astonishing.
I won't argue with you there.
And anybody who wants to know about water.
Water, that's the next item, isn't it?
Is it? All right, yes. Okay, water is the next item. This from Renewable Energy magazine, U.S. wind power saved 68 billion gallons of water in the U.S.
That's
in 2014.
215 gallons per person, or 517 million bottles of water.
Oh, wow. According to a report by the AWEA, this is increasingly valuable benefit in droughts. In California, wind energy saved 2.5 billion gallons of fresh water in 2014, while Texas led the nation with savings of 13 billion gallons of water. And that's largely because thermal power plants, and thermal power plants include most natural gas plants, coal plants,
oil,
and nuclear.
Nuclear.
Yeah. And those plants use a lot of water.
Well, basically they boil water.
They boil water, but they
Use it
also
to run turbines.
use water
And
to
use
cool
it for
things
cooling.
off. And you know, the amount of water that's used, water's a big issue. It was a big issue at Vermont Yankee. And that what they were doing was they were
using the river.
They're using the river, and they were in the minds of a lot of people polluting the river
Well,
with heat.
And I think some of the fish would have had something to say about that.
I think they probably would. There were a lot of fish that died as a result. There are also fish that would live in the hot water.
Yeah, but different kind of fish.
Different kinds of fish. And there are
And
fish.
they were doing it because it was cheaper to run river water than
Yeah.
to use their cooling tower.
Right,
Which was
much.
there. It was sitting there.
The cooling towers cost, as I recall, $1 million a day to run. And there are nuclear power plants that have resident groups of invasive carp living in the water that they heat because they.
Do they really?
Yeah,
Huh?
I think
they're
grass carp.
warm. They like warmth.
These particular carp like warmth.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, some carp, like goldfish, for example, will swim around under the ice perfectly happily.
Yeah.
But we have goldfish in tanks in our greenhouse,
Uh-huh.
and the goldfish swim around under the ice.
Under the ice.
And the ice can be 5 inches thick, and the goldfish don't care.
They don't,
You
they
know,
don't even know about it. Yeah.
Well, does the goldfish know he's wet? When you bring him food, he gets very excited. Is he salivating? Okay.
There's a quick takeaway here.
Okay.
They gave us a list of the states that are leading in production of wind power.
Okay.
Iowa produces 28.5% of its electricity from wind power.
Right.
South Dakota 25.3, Kansas 21.7, and wind energy provides more than 15% of the total energy generated in 7 more states, more than 10% in a total of 9 states, and more than 5% in a total of 19 states. And I'm not going to bore you with a list of the states, but we're getting close to more than half. We're over more than half.
However, interestingly enough, one of the states that has wind power generating between 10 and 15% is Nebraska, and there is Nebraska sandwiched right between Kansas and Iowa.
Yeah.
And why is Nebraska not generating power like that? It's because of politics.
Yeah.
And the
Because
politics.
they got wind too.
Oh, they've got as much wind as Kansas.
Yeah.
But the folks in Nebraska have got other priorities, and one of the priorities is the political consideration, and a lot of it, I think, is related to how the utilities are set up.
It's also interesting that the biggest utility in the state is public utility, publicly owned.
In Nebraska.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what that means, though, is the
That's
Nebraska.
socialism.
Yeah, right. The Nebraska public utility can say, "Wait a minute, we don't want wind power," and the legislature listens because the utility has got a monopoly, and it's the only voice that counts.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's hard to fight against that.
Well, that's actually a residual thing from back in the turn of the last century when people in areas like Nebraska, particularly the farmers, were pushing for socialistic solutions.
Well, it was really the only way things could work.
Well, it's probably the only way they get power.
Right.
There wasn't enough people there.
There wasn't enough people, so they
Yeah.
had to band together. The cost of bringing in power, I mean, my grandfather lived in Nebraska, okay? And my great-grandfather lived in Nebraska, and my grandmother grew up in his household, and she was there at the turn of the 20th century, and he had the first electric system in the town that he lived in.
Yeah, you've mentioned that. The
And-
first telephone, the only
And the
telephone
first
in town.
only personal telephone in town for 17 years. And he was wealthy, so he donated a community telephone at the front door of his hardware store, and then another telephone at the doctor's office, so that the people in town could call the doctor.
Well, that makes sense.
But it meant
yeah.
that he had a telephone and he could
Yeah.
call to
Yeah,
Chicago.
he had his telephone.
I'm told that his phone was used 3 times in 17 years. But he also had an electric system, and he had a guy who worked on his farm whose job included making sure that the electric system was working. And I heard a description of how that worked on one occasion from my great uncle. And he basically left me with the impression that what they were doing was using batteries, but the batteries were being charged by changing the electrolytes.
Wow.
So they would take the
They didn't have any generators.
They didn't have a generator. And they would take the electrolyte, and I don't know what they did. They might have shipped it off somewhere for recharging or something, but they didn't have a way, or at least initially they didn't have a way to deal with it. But the alternative to that, if you're going to have electric power, would have been to bring in miles and miles and miles and miles of cable, which was far more expensive than any farmer, regardless of wealth, could do. So they had to band together, and in many places in the United States they made co-ops, and it happened that I'm sure they made co-ops in Nebraska, but they eventually wound up with a state utility, and that was the reason, because you needed to have. It
was practicality.
It was practicality, absolutely, and you know, in those days they didn't call it socialism. You know, what do they know? Okay, I think that's probably enough for that.
Back to Australia.
Australia, where are we here? Oh yes, Hazelwood Brown Coal Power Plant is one of the largest greenhouse gas emitters in Australia in the state of Victoria. 2 Harvard professors have attempted to find the cost of unseen impacts of the plant's emissions based on work by the U.S. National Academy of Science. They estimate it at about $100 million a year. That one plant is costing the Australians $900 million.
You don't think about it.
You don't think about it because it's being dumped invisibly in your backyard.
Yeah.
And you can't see the particles invisibly get into the child's lungs and cause asthma.
Well, that's just exactly what this article was saying.
Exactly.
Opponents argue this ignores hidden costs of burning coal on a planet and human health.
Right. And we, by the way, have hidden costs of oil being burned in cars, and we have hidden costs.
Oh yeah, and they are hidden costs, and they're real.
Yeah,
even though
of
they're
natural gas that's being fracked out of the ground and loses 30% of what it finds. And we have hidden costs of other things too. You know.
They finish up this article with a takeaway here. It's not dissimilar to the principle that you had to pay to have rubbish removed from the curb outside your house.
Absolutely, yeah. So, you know, it's kind of what they're doing, and I say this often, is very much like dumping your trash in your neighbor's backyard, or put another way, your neighbor dumping his trash in your backyard. Well, why would we permit the coal companies to do that? We shouldn't.
Well, for one thing, because nobody realized it was happening.
Yeah, they've known about it.
For another thing, they made sure you didn't realize it was happening.
They've known about it for a long time, though. When I was in high school, I didn't have this beard. My hair was the color of Rupert Grint.
Of what?
It was the color of, what is that kid's name? Rupert? He played Ron Weasley in the Harry Potter thing.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, he had really, really bright, kind of reddish, red blonde.
Oh, yeah?
Blondish red, yeah. Bright, bright color. And in those days, when I still had hair on the top of my head, there were things going on, like a local school in New Jersey removed the marble statues. This is a Catholic school, and replaced them by concrete castings.
Because the
marble was getting dissolved by acid rain, and they knew where that acid rain was coming from.
Yeah.
And that's why Richard Nixon, you know, who is hardly a socialist, got up in front of the Congress and said, if we don't do something about this, it'll be too late.
Yeah.
And that was the first Earth Day, or before the first Earth Day.
When I was living in Rhode Island, there was a flap about car paint getting destroyed by acid rain.
Yeah.
And it was attributed to coal burning plants.
Yeah. We've known about this for a long time, and we have not been able to overcome the coal industry's hold. And that's really what it boils down to. Mm-hmm. So, anyway.
It's been a big business. You know?
It's been a big business.
Very big business.
And our next business is also a big business.
This is basically about the same thing from a different viewpoint. This is Exxon.
From Marig Media, ExxonMobil's dangerous business strategy, that's the title. This is an opinion piece. Total, Eni, Statoil, and Shell are advocating for a carbon price, such as a tax or permit system, to hasten the transition to low-carbon energy and are beginning to prepare internally for it. However, ExxonMobil's business model continues to deny reality.
These are all very large oil companies.
Yep.
Total, Eni, Statoil, and Shell, they're all foreign.
Yeah.
But Exxon's America. But they're all doing this. Well, they're not all doing the same thing. That's the purpose of this article.
They're all pumping oil out of the ground.
They're pumping oil, but at least they're talking about doing something about their residue.
Yes.
And ExxonMobil is sitting there saying, we're not.
That's not our problem.
And as they say in the article, this approach is not only morally wrong, it's also doomed financially.
Yeah, well, it is doomed financially. I should point out, you go to Wikipedia and you look up the list of the biggest companies in the world by revenue. And
Most of them are oil companies, aren't they?
Huh?
Most of them are oil companies.
A third of them are oil companies. Yeah. And the fact that a third of there's 64 of them last time I looked, and there's 21 oil companies in the mix, and then in addition to that, you've got the big coal companies, which are mostly conglomerates. I guess they're all conglomerates. These companies control a huge percentage of the world's wealth that goes through transactions every year.
Yeah,
a huge percentage.
Yeah, it is.
And so they are able to go to governments and say, this is what we want. And in most cases, the governments will listen. And in the United States...
And that's governments the world around, not just our government.
Absolutely. And in the United States, that's what's been happening. And that is what continues to happen in Washington, D.C. And when you compare big wind with big oil, big wind is about 2% the size. This is a David and Goliath story with big wind
is growing,
being David.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. They try to scare us about big wind.
Yeah, well, it irks me like mad. The largest wind turbine company in the world is Vestas. It's gross. Vestas. It's gross receipts, its gross revenues in 2014 were about $13 billion, which is a lot of money.
Yeah.
But it's only an eighth of what it takes to be one of those 64 companies.
Okay. They got a long way to go.
They got a long way to go to be on that list.
A couple of interesting sentences I grabbed out of this article. This single company, Exxon, has contributed more than 3% of the world's total emissions since the start of the fossil fuel age. We're going to go back to 1800 or 3% of the world's total emissions from one company.
Start of the fossil fuel age. You know, I'm thinking of the fact that the forests in Scotland were denuded. I think it was during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. This is like about 1600 AD.
Yeah.
And they took care of the shortfall in wood by switching to coal. And that was
okay.
That was a long time ago.
They took the wood to make ships, didn't they?
They took that was a large part of it.
I know they took the wood in Ireland to make ships.
They took the wood in Ireland to make ships. They took the wood in New Hampshire to make ships. New Hampshire was one of the world's best sources of masts. So anyway.
The other one, it says, other thing, takeaway from the article, business plans that include investments in the Arctic, the ultra-deep sea, and the oil sands of Canada have no place in a climate-safe world. The investors must urgently query the company's management on a business strategy that contradicts global needs and policy agreements. If ExxonMobil persists in its dangerous business strategy, the company investors should quickly conclude that the time has come to pull up stakes and move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what that thing that we were talking about earlier was.
Yeah.
The thing with Ceres. Okay, we are going to be running short of time because we've used up 2/3 of our time and half of our news. Our next item is from Hawaii. In 2013, computer simulations by the Hawaii Electric Company showed the grid could not handle more distributed solar power, and they put a moratorium on new rooftop solar connections. Then Lyndon Rive, the CEO of Solar City, got the electric company, the utility, to run actual tests, and based on the results, the moratorium was lifted. They discovered that they could actually handle twice as much solar as they were handling.
And they're fighting back.
Yeah.
So, and these guys are all cousins with Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, yeah.
And I was reading about the article. It was a little bit. This is a long article.
Yeah.
And it's worth reading. But one of the interesting things I thought was very funny. This guy Rive was born in South Africa.
Yeah.
And he came up to California to participate in an underwater hockey tournament where you play in the bottom of a swimming pool.
No, I didn't read that.
But he liked California and he came back. He went home, sold his business, and came back.
Wow.
And he and his brothers and their cousin are
They all got together.
monopolizing
Yeah. Okay. That was from Reading Eagle. Our next
Reading,
item,
Pennsylvania.
I guess it is.
Yeah, I think so.
Crane's Detroit business tells us the Detroit Zoo is headed for greener pastures with its plan for the next for the first biodigester in a U.S. zoo. The $1.1 million project will convert 400 to 500 tons of manure and other organic waste annually. The biodigester will save the zoo $70,000 to $80,000 in energy costs and $30,000 to $40,000 in waste disposal fees every year.
And it will also produce compost.
And it'll produce compost, which can be sold.
There's an interesting thing here that was also in the article. The zoo doesn't expect the byproducts from the digester to trouble neighbors. The only times the smell is exposed is when the doors are open.
Yeah.
And there's one of the denizens of the zoo there.
I got a picture. I got a nice picture.
I didn't even bring this one up.
No. I thought that was a fun picture. Yeah, anyway. Our next item from CNews Renewables says this: Toshiba Corporation on Monday, and this actually happened on Monday, but you know I was able to put it in the blog on Monday because Monday started about 16 hours.
It started late, didn't it?
Yeah. It started about 16 hours before I started working at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Uh-huh.
But that's because you know the date keeps moving around the world. Has said that it has started operations at a demonstration facility using renewable energy and hydrogen in the city of Kawasaki, Japan. Solar power is used for the electrolysis of water to produce hydrogen, which is then stored and used in fuel cells to generate electricity and hot water.
So they're using panels to generate electricity. They're storing that electricity in batteries.
As hydrogen.
Well, eventually.
Oh, okay.
They're first storing it in regular batteries,
Okay.
using it to run water electrolysis equipment where they get the hydrogen.
Yep.
And they're storing the hydrogen
for later use. It's
Yeah.
all, you know, this is another one of those many things that people do.
And there's a picture of one of the actual units, and it
Okay.
looks like a container, shipping container.
It looks like a shipping container. It probably is a shipping container.
One way or another it is.
Yep. On Tuesday, April 21st, we got this from Think Progress. Carbon emissions from the U.S. energy sector increased in 2014 for the second year in a row, despite a big boost in renewable energy capacity, the Energy Information Administration reported on Monday. Energy-related carbon emissions increased by 0.7% in 2014, but at the same time, the gross domestic product grew at a rate of 2.4%. So the good news is the carbon emissions are growing slower than the economy is increasing, and
That's good news.
We will see them reverse.
The picture
We've
there is
actually been
interesting.
seeing
If
them
you look
reverse.
carefully, you'll see a flock of geese flying over that generating station.
Yeah, kind of a fun picture. That note came from Think Progress. The Jakarta Post sent us without knowing who we were, over the internet. By overhauling Indonesia's fuel subsidy program, the country's government is now striving to explore new and renewable, after overcoming, they're exploring new and renewable energy resources. Indonesia is currently heavily dependent on fossil fuels, particularly oil and coal, despite having abundant resources for renewable energy, primarily geothermal and solar. Now,
Yeah, they mentioned the geothermal. We didn't realize it, but the country's got a lot of volcanoes.
yes,
And where there's volcanoes, there's
geothermal
geothermal potential.
power. Yeah,
And
you
they
had
get a lot
pointed
of sun, too.
Yeah, you had pointed out that there's even geothermal happening
Here
in
in
Vermont.
Vermont, yeah.
But this was one that I found kind of interesting because the country, Indonesia, has historically been a big oil producer.
Yeah, they have.
So
I think that's one of the reasons why we had a war with the Japanese.
that was a big contributing thing. You know, it was
Who was going to get that oil?
Well, the Japanese wanted that oil. They knew they were going to go and get it, and they also knew that in order to get it, they had to go past the Philippines, which were controlled at the time by the
By
United
us,
States.
yeah.
So, of course, what they did was try to sink the American fleet at Pearl Harbor. The whole thing happened because of oil.
Yeah.
And the Japanese, when the Americans cut off the Japanese from that oil, they really were not able to conduct their war efforts at all. And at the end of the war, the entire useful Japanese Navy, the biggest ship was a cruiser.
Biggest ship?
Biggest ship in the Japanese Navy that was actually usable
Yeah.
was a cruiser.
Uh-huh.
They had lost
all their battleships.
of all the battleships and aircraft carriers, and they had something like 17 destroyers. Where the United States, if you included all of the aircraft carriers we had, and that includes Jeep carriers, do you know what they are? Jeep carriers?
They were converted merchant ships.
They were
weren't
converted merchant ships. They were designed as merchant ships,
Yeah.
and then they had flight decks put on them, and they were used for convoy and protection in the Atlantic and for just carrying airplanes in the Pacific. They were not combat ships. 99 aircraft carriers we had. The Japanese had 18 ships. They were in serious trouble, and it was because they were cut off from their oil.
You don't hear that much, though.
You don't hear about it much because people like talking about the wonderful things that happened in combat.
Yeah.
What, of course, really happened was a lot of
people died is what happened.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of stuff going on that was related to oil. Okay.
Well, here's one about another big company that's getting on the ball.
Apple. New environmental responsibility report doesn't mince words. It states clearly the debate about whether climate change exists is over. We don't want to debate climate change. We want to stop it. Apple is a big advocate of renewable energy and is willing to put its money where its mouth is. This is from the Green Optimistic.
There's a sentence here that says the companies have also publicly feuded with the nonprofit conservative organization, the American Legislative Exchange Council.
Publicly.
Yeah.
The CEO of Google also said that they were a bunch of liars.
That's what this article said. Literally lying about climate change.
Yeah, literally lying about climate change. And why would they do that? Well, it's because the people who fund them are going to stop making money.
And who funds them?
Well, we're going back to Koch Industries, aren't we? You know, I mean, we've got a country in which it is possible to buy congressmen, or at least pay enough of the costs of their campaigns to put them in a position where they owe you a lot, and then tell them, by the way,
this is what I want you to do.
This is what I want you to do. I want you to deny climate change. And you say, oh yes, well you've got scientists who say there is no climate change. And never mind the fact that there are a bunch of buggy whip engineers. You know. And never mind the fact that it puts us into a position where the Chinese are going to be ahead of us when we get into a position where they have a lot of renewable power and we don't. It puts us back in security. Never mind the fact that the military are complaining about climate change. You know, just buy yourself a few congressmen who are willing to say it doesn't exist.
Well, I do remember reading a long, long time ago that one of the best investments on return on investment that a corporation can make is to buy a politician.
Yeah, well.
And it was not talking tongue-in-cheek when it said that.
Yeah, but now in the United States, that kind of corruption is legal.
It's legal now, unfortunately.
which means that we can see it happening in real time. So we can know who has been bought and who has
Well,
not.
sort of, but who has been bought, we know, but who's doing the buying is concealed.
Well, yeah, they can
'Cause they got these
conceal.
packs and
You know, they've
stuff like
they've
that.
got all of that stuff. You know, they can conceal it, but you know what? It's legal, so they don't.
So they don't, yeah.
In many
Get away with
cases,
it.
or in some cases. Anyway, that is that. Now, where are we?
Audi.
Audi. Oh yes, Audi has been a pioneer in diesel vehicle technology for decades, actually for quite a few decades. Now they have announced successfully producing their first batch of eco-friendly diesel fuel. It is a synthetic version made from carbon dioxide and water using Audi's latest technology in sustainability. Ambient CO2 can be collected for use.
They collected it out of the air.
Yeah, this was something, and this, by the way, from Car Tech. This is something, the business of getting ambient CO2 out of the air for this is something that I don't think they stressed in the article, but it was.
They just kind of slid over it.
Yeah,
It's there in the
but
picture.
I wanted to put it in here because it seems like such an interesting aspect of this whole thing. Because if that's what
well,
they're
they're
doing,
sequestering carbon.
yeah, if that's what they're doing, then we can have
It's a recycling of that carbon.
right. It's taken directly from the air.
Yep.
Which means you don't have to destroy forests or
Yep.
plant straw or whatever to get it. You just take the carbon out of the air. Now, I don't know how much it's going to cost to do that, but, you know, we'll
It's
see.
interesting to see that a manufacturing company, and Audi is Volkswagen, by the way. That's the upscale.
Yes.
It's owned by Volkswagen. They run them separately. But,
Yes.
yeah, they're working on alternate ways to cement their particular brand of automobile.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not that they're not working on electric cars, because they are, but, you know.
Audi has got a lot going on with the electric
Yeah.
cars, and aren't they the one who said that they wanted to ditch? No, that was BMW.
Yep.
BMW wanted to ditch internal combustion.
And Audi
engines.
kind of fights BMW. They're in the same
Well,
niche.
they're in competition with
Yeah.
each other. So
Yeah,
Audi
that's what I
wants to have diesel. You know, that's understandable. So, what's next?
Moving right along. South
Clean
Korea.
Technica. Korea has created a PV-covered bike lane connecting Sejong and Daejeon. I don't know how to pronounce it. It offers a clean transit option that utilizes unused media space in an existing highway, while providing renewable solar electricity. The PV-covered bike lanes run approximately 20 miles, 32 kilometers, between the two cities. And they
I
will
got a
keep-
couple of interesting pictures up here.
Yeah,
The one on the left is taken from a video.
okay,
And the video showed an airplane riding over a highway.
right,
And you could see the cars moving. It doesn't seem to bother anybody. The one on the right was also from a video. And there's sort of like a kiosk right there.
okay,
And the bike riders are emerging from that kiosk. They must be entering it from underneath.
right.
And you can see a couple of bike riders right there. And then they get under this thing and they just keep on tooling along, you know. And the solar arrays are over their head, protecting
Right.
them a little bit from the sun and from the rain.
A little bit.
Little bit.
I wonder how much that is.
Well, they get most of the sun,
Yeah.
but the fresh air's still
I
there.
wonder whether the rain isn't just being concentrated in waterfalls they have to drive through.
Yeah, they probably are.
Okay.
Okay, moving along.
Moving along.
We're not going to spend too much time in this one.
Yeah. The next one is interesting from Clean Technica. Big
It's
oil.
Bloomberg again.
Yes. Big oil is losing its grip on the auto industry, and perhaps more interestingly, the recent drop in oil prices is at least partly the result of a demand destruction rather than simply being a supply issue, according to analysts at Bloomberg New Energy Finance. The future of transportation is set to look very different. And
So we're saying that the demand for oil is dropping as they are increasing the production.
right. And
Something's going to happen.
yeah, well, you know that, and the demand for oil can continue dropping for a long time. But the bottom line on this, I think, is that what it means is the price of oil is low, but it's not because we've got abundant oil. It's because we're in a post-oil period, and the post-oil period, the post-peak oil period, we really did enter into in 1970. And it's been downhill ever since, and people haven't realized it. A lot of it has been an increase in prices. But the prices only increase so far before you get to a point where they cannot sustain continued growth. And when that happens, people start going to other resources to power their transportation. And when that happens, the oil industry has to scramble against falling prices during falling supply period. This is a very, very difficult period for oil companies.
One of the things this article mentions that you haven't is there's been a dramatic improvement in mileage.
Yes.
Miles per gallon.
Yes.
Which cuts demand.
Yes.
And then people are switching to electric cars slowly.
Yeah.
But there's hybrids now.
Yeah.
That wasn't even thought of 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's supply and demand. I mean, it's changing the direction that automobiles and oil are going.
And it's doing that because of a variety of things. This thing that we saw at Audi is just another aspect of this, where they're starting to make oil out of non-petroleum sources. So the people who are in the oil industry are in a position where people are cutting demand for heating oil with efficiency, which is a permanent cut. It means that once they've paid down that efficiency thing that they're doing in their house, which is very often by insulation or whatever, that part of the oil demand just disappears, and they're cutting it with like Dow Chemical, looking for alternate sources for carbon molecules other than petroleum products. And what we're seeing is their demand is being cut everywhere. And simultaneously, they're getting into a position where their biggest users are looking for other ways of powering their vehicles. And simultaneously... And heating homes. And simultaneously, you're seeing a bunch of other things happening, including the pressure that gets put on them by political establishments because of the damage that's being done to the earth. And so they're in a real tight position here, and it's hardly a surprise that the investors at BP would say, before we're going to continue holding these investments, we've got to know what they're actually worth. And in order to do that, we've got to know what's happening with climate change. So,
interesting developments.
Yes, we've got one more item here, which is 3 organizations: Sempra Energy Southern California Gas Company, the U.S. DOE's National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and the industry-backed National Fuel Cell Research Center are combining forces to produce a series of projects demonstrating converting renewable power into methane fuel. And we're back to the same thing. You know, here we are. We're going to be making natural gas synthetically, so it's not natural anymore, it's synthetic.
Yeah,
but
it's
the same stuff. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference if you looked at an atom. We're gonna make natural gas out of wherever we can get atoms. And that being the case, we're going to be basically taking the bite off of the market, the natural gas industry's connections with the market, and you know all of this is
here. We already talked about this one. They're taking solar and wind, using it to electrolyze water, collecting the hydrogen, throwing away that horrible oxygen stuff, and then converting the hydrogen to synthetic methane by grabbing CO2, grabbing the carbon out of CO2, and storing it. And sometimes they're storing it as natural gas, which is relatively easy to store. And then sometimes they're storing it as hydrogen, which is a lot more difficult.
A lot more difficult, but if you're only going to store it for a day or two, it's good. I think it's about time for us to say good evening or good morning or whatever it is to our viewing audience.
Are we on the last one here?
That's the last one. We just read it.
That's the last one I got.
And so I will say good evening, good morning, or goodbye, whichever it is.
I'm going to put us both up here on the screen
to everybody.
I can wave too.
I am George Harvey. This is Tom Finnell, the famous and justifiably honored.
Oh, thank you.
Have a nice evening or a nice morning or whatever it is. Yes, indeed. Bye-bye. See you next time.
We spin and we toil, we work all day,
Sowing and reaping, we store goods away, so we can be dressed well on the day that we die. We dig and drill and waste what we find, break up the earth, leaving little behind. But we will grow lilies in the by and by. I want to point out that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I want to hope gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still.